Good evening, everyone. I'm James Rhodes, Pitt County Planning Director. I'm going to turn the meeting over now to our acting chairman, current vice chairman, Brad Guth.
Good evening. Welcome everybody to the October Planning Board meeting. If we can call the roll now, sir.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fred Alston.
Present.
Able to join us tonight. Don Brown.
Present.
Naomi Buck.
Present.
David Davenport is also unable to be with us tonight. Brad Guth.
Present.
RJ Hemby is unavailable tonight. Our new member, John Landron.
I'm present.
Little. Mr. Steve Little.
Steve Rosetan.
Hey, yes, sir. Here, I'm here. I'm here.
Tucker Moore.
Here.
And Maria Rogerson.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum for tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Now, if we could have a moment of silence for prayer. Thank you. And Mr. Rhodes, if you would leave us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please, sir.
I'll be glad to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America, and to the republic that stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll move forward with the approval of the minutes from the August 19th meeting. Did all the board members receive copies of the minutes?
Don Brown make a motion.
Second.
Motion.
Mr. Brown has made a motion, and I believe that was Ms. Buck that seconded it, or Ms. Rogerson.
Ms. Rogerson.
All right. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do we need to do a roll call vote on that, Mr. Rhodes?
Yes, we do. And I'll run through those with the members that are present. Fred Alston,
Aye.
Don Brown,
Aye.
Naomi Buck,
Aye.
Brad Guth,
Approve.
John Landron,
Aye.
Tucker Moore,
Affirmative.
Rogerson. Yeah, Rogerson.
Here. Aye. In favor.
And back to Mr. Little, Steve Little.
Hey, yes, sir. Aye.
Okay, that's unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are there any public comments to be made to the board at this point?
Yes. Is it concerning the Johns Cove subdivision?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we have a speaker that's wanting to speak on the proposed subdivision that's under consideration tonight, and it might be more appropriate under public comments following the staff report for that item.
Okay, let's do it that way then. Can you Let's
Is
move
that
forward.
correct, Ms. Jones? That's what you're here to speak about, right?
Yes, I am.
Ms. Jones,
Okay.
we'll get you taken care of when we present the development review report for that subdivision. Is that understood?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we have some planning board appointments and reappointments and recognitions.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and I'll go through those fairly quickly. Most of you are aware that's in your agenda package for tonight. We have one new appointment. You may recall we had two members that are outgoing, Ms. Faye Barefoot and also Danny Smith. The position for Mr. Smith has been filled with John Landron, and we're going to swear him in just a minute. Ms. Faye's position has not been filled yet. So in effect, Ms. Faye, had she been in town, could have served again tonight until that position is filled. So my understanding, we should have that position filled most likely before your next meeting. Also, we do have two reappointments, Mr. R.J. Hemby as well as Mr. Fred Austin. You might recall Mr. Austin was fulfilling a limited term previously, and he's been since reappointed to a full 3-year term now. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, I could go ahead with the affirmation of our new member, Mr. John Landron.
That'd be great. Welcome, John. Let's get you on the board.
Okay, Mr. Landron, I'm going to read your oath, and I'd like for you to repeat after me. I, John Landron,
I, John Landry,
do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support and maintain
that I will support and maintain
the Constitution and laws of the United States
the Constitution and laws of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of my office
the duties of my office
as a member of the Planning Board.
as a member of the Planning Board.
Thank you, Mr. Landron.
All right, welcome, Mr. Landron.
Thank you.
Glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
And Mr. Chair, our Assistant County Attorney, Jordan Smith, will come up and assist with the election of officers.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Board. By your rules of procedure at your meeting in October, you're required to elect a person to hold the position of chair, vice chair, and to appoint the planning director, James Rhodes, as your executive secretary. So I'm here tonight to help assist you with these processes. We will have, as far as the chair and vice chair, any member can serve as chair or vice chair. Any member can nominate him or herself or any other member to serve in that capacity. There's not any questions about the process. I would open the floor to nominations for the position of chair.
And Steve Little has his hand up.
Who can get Mr. Little? Do I control it up here?
No.
If we can get Mr. Little queued up to speak.
Yes, I'd like to nominate Mr. Brad Guth to be our chairperson for the coming year.
Are there any other nominations? If you could raise your hand if you're interested in making one.
Tucker Moore has his hand up.
I'm back down.
No other hands up?
No.
For the moment, we'll pause on that, and just procedurally, due to the roll call vote, I figured we could possibly achieve all these appointments in one motion. So with that being said, we'll pause on the nominations for chair, with Brad Guth being the only nominee, and open up the floor for nominees for the position of vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Steve Little.
Are there any other nominations for the position of vice chair? All right, seeing none, I would recommend to the board procedurally to make a motion that does four things. One, close the floor for nominations to both offices. Appoint Brad Guth as chair. 3, appoint Steve Little as vice chair. And 4, appoint planning director James Rhodes as your executive secretary. If someone can make and second that motion, then James can come up and do the roll call vote.
So move.
I think Steve has made the motion. Mr. Little's made the motion, and Ms. Rogerson has her hand up to second, I believe.
I'll second that motion.
And Mr. Chair, I will go through the roll call vote.
You, sir.
Brad Austin, you've heard the assistant attorney and the motion that's been made. What say you?
I say aye.
Okay. Don Brown? Mr. Brown? We'll move forward to Ms. Naomi Buck.
Mr. Brown has raised his hand. Ms. Buck has raised her hand.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Buck. Back to Don Brown.
Aye. They got me unmuted now. Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Brad Guth,
Aye.
John Landron,
Aye.
thank you. Steve Little,
Aye.
Tucker Moore,
Affirmative.
and Maria Rogerson.
Aye.
Okay, Mr. Guth, you're the new chair. Thank you very much, and we'll let you proceed on.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We're going to go down to our development review. And is it Mr. Bryant going to present that, or?
Yes.
All right.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Planning Board. Tonight we have Cheshire Landing Phase 2 preliminary plan. It's located on Whiskey Court, south of its intersection with Bedard Road in the Grimesland Township. This subdivision is 21 lots, 27.9 acres. The owner is Piedmont Natural Gas Company. This is an overall view to give you an idea where this is located. This is a little closer view. If you notice, the blue and red there is the flood zone. And this is an overall layout. And looking closer, there are some 404 wetlands that will remain undisturbed. A natural gas line easement. And this will be a non-access easement that will not allow access from Bedard Road into this subdivision. And as noted, the small portion of this property is located within the 100-year flood zone. The site is zoned RR with 30,000 square foot lot minimum size. 2 new streets are proposed. Electricity is to be provided by Greenville Utilities, water by Eastern Pines Corporation. The conditions and requirements on this plan, based on the calculations submitted, this development will require installation of best management practices and/or payment must be approved and paid to a private mitigation bank or environmental enhancement program. Whiskey Court and the new roads on the preliminary plan should be labeled as private. Roads are private and therefore no stub out is required. And a landscape buffer will be required along Bedard Road. The septic systems must be approved prior to the final plat approval. And NCDOT will require a non-access easement as previously shown along Bedard Road, which is currently shown as Lot 48. Greenville Utilities approves this plan. Eastern Pines Water approves this plan. School districts are GR Whitfield and DH Conley. Pitt County Emergency Management approves this plan. Here's a few pictures. This is the current site. This is looking along Whiskey Court and Cheshire Landing Phase 1. This is another view of the adjacent property along Whiskey Court, still in Phase 1. And this is the adjacent property and the wooded area. And just looking overall at the site condition. And this is approximately where the road will come in, right there to the left of that ditch or canal. The Technical Review Committee has recommended conditional approval. Adjacent property owners have been notified and staff has received a few phone calls and emails in regards to the proposed development. In the comments in question, people wishing to review the plan with interest in home size proposed and overall design, and some to address the board via letter and attend the meeting. One property owner. Hello, I'm Pete Cringen at 2910 Schooner Lane of the adjacent Johns Cove. My property is the last lot to the southeast of the subject parcel to be developed. I share a 487-foot length of that property line. Currently, the land immediately beyond all our property lines to the west is at a raised grade and serves to channel any rainwater runoff from our backyards along the property line south-southwest to Juniper Creek. Unfortunately, the most southern half of my 487 feet was not graded well enough and allows some water to disperse from the intended path along the property line into my property. Beyond my disappointment and loss of privacy, which is one reason why I purchased, my concern is the plan for the rainwater drainage of that subdivision. I would like assurance that this development will not add to existing rainwater flow to our properties. As mentioned, the land is at a higher grade just above our property lines. How will this concern be addressed? Another property owner. My name is Julia Jones, and I live in Johns Cove subdivision adjacent to Cheshire Landing, proposed subdivision in review for expansion. I have been a 20-year resident of this area. I have enjoyed the years that I have lived here because it is a quiet suburban area with a rural feel of open space and farmland, free of overcrowding and congestion. Recently, there have been several neighborhoods that have been developed, and the dynamic of what I enjoyed has changed. Although the area of Eastern Pines has adapted fantastically to this change by building a larger fire station and improving infrastructure, the area has become noisy throughout the day and continues into the evenings, and traffic has become more congested. The area is becoming overpopulated and the farmland is decreasing. The main reason why I live in this area is to enjoy the quiet, peaceful suburban life that I am accustomed to for the last 20 years. My fear is that this area may mirror the inner city area with these additions of homes being built. I do not want the land to be subdivided for additional homes to be built. It will drastically change the way of life for me in this area. I'm not in favor of parcel 16363 being subdivided into lots for subdivision. I want to preserve this area and its rural contributes. Sincerely, the concerned neighbor, Julia Jones. Please preserve the Eastern Pines, Grimesland, Simpson area. And now, do we have any public comment to the board?
Mr. Bryant, let's ask the board itself if they have any questions about your conditions or requirements or the adjacent property owners that you read. Is there any questions from the planning board?
Probably spoke too fast, Brad, but I just want to make sure I heard Ms. Jones and she's coming forth with her letter.
Well,
We hear her. So there again, just that address. And I think the other gentleman that he asked a question too, that hopefully we have somebody that can address his question. Sorry, I spoke.
no, you're fine. You're fine. Absolutely. Mr. Austin, you have your hand up as well. Did you have a question for Mr. Bryant?
I do, and this is, forgive me being the newbie around here, and please indulge me. The private road nature of this proposal, Whiskey Road, is phase 1 already? Is that a private road as well?
Correct. And the new roads that are proposed will also be required to be private. Therefore, no stub out is required.
Is there any agreement or requirements by the developer to be able to maintain this in the future? Because I think we've had some history with private roads being poorly maintained.
Yes, they will need to have HOA documents that address this.
Okay. Thank you.
And Mr. Austin, I think the developer is here so that he could address that with his time next. So do we want to go to the public comments now? I think Ms. Jones is here to speak.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Again, as stated before, my name is Julia Jones, and this area that I live in, which is now becoming overpopulated, as stated in my letter, is drastically changing. And like I said, you know, the fire department has come in and started a building phase for a fire station, but because of the houses and the development that will be placed out here, the congestion and the noise level, and as one of my neighbors stated, rainwater, drainage, a lot of factors go into developing a new subdivision. As they stated, okay, HOA does provide for continuous maintaining of roads, but that's not always the case. Because sometimes HOAs can be swept under the rug, and it just slips by and it's really not taken serious by tenant and or developer. So my concern is just making sure that we as Johns Cove residents, which this is a quiet area, stay a quiet area, because with so many homes coming in, there runs a chance, more so a bigger chance, as far as congestion in this neighborhood, causing us to look at other ways to get out of our subdivision, buses, children, because COVID is not going to be here always. So you're thinking about buses coming in the morning, parents leaving out, taking their kids to school. So much is going to be affected. And I just want to preserve the area that I lived in and loved.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Thank you for your comments. I believe we have a representative from the subdivision developer, Mr. Weaver.
Yes, sir, Mr. Good. Thank you. I guess I'll touch on them and the points that were raised. Ms. Jones, I'll speak to your point first. As far as the congestion, we got with NCDOT with this during the technical review process, and they've given their comments on that. We are the developers of phase 1. We knew going in, I think it was, the ordinances were just passed a year or two before phase 1 was done, and they addressed private and public road requirements. And we're going to meet those to make sure that the homeowners association is in good shape when we do turn it over. To let you know a little bit about ourselves, we're local. We're not out of town builders. Bill Clark started in Pitt County in 1977, and we've done a lot of developments. And I'm proud to say that we didn't contribute to any orphan roads in Pitt County. We've always gotten everything taken over that we have developed. So we consider ourselves very responsible developers and leaving our homeowners and customers in good shape to be able to take care of any private roads or get them accepted by NCDOT, whichever is in question, whichever subdivision's in question. So we are a local home builder. We do take it serious. We're here. We live in Pitt County. So we want to be good neighbors, and we want to develop in a responsible manner. So as far as the congestion, that's what I would suggest on that level. We are meeting the current zoning requirements. So we're not requesting for any kind of down zoning. So we're developing how the land is zoned at this point. And we're going to move forward in a responsible manner with stormwater. We're going to meet the county's requirements for stormwater control. So hopefully that will alleviate some concern there. Regarding drainage and the gentleman's letter, where storm drainage or rainwater is going from our property to his, I can't speak to how his lot was graded or who did it. We didn't develop his property or build his home. I will say with North Carolina state law, there is the allowance for properties to keep draining how it historically has drained. But then again, you have to meet the requirements to detain certain amounts of water so you're not overloading those neighbors. So we have our engineer present. He can speak to storm drainage a little bit more, but he's got a design in place to take care of those concerns. I think in that area where that gentleman's letter states where we share a common line, I think that our engineer with Stroud Engineering, that's Richie Brown, has put in a swell to direct that water down that common line and down towards the creek where the main run is down there. So hopefully that'll take care of the concerns with the storm drain as well. So we're very responsible. If you have any issues during the process, please contact our office. You can ask for me. I'll call you back. I'll meet you on site. I'll do anything I can to help you feel more comfortable in what we're doing. And please feel free to do that. So I'm here for any other questions that anybody may have. I believe we're fulfilling the ordinance requirements in this subdivision request.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Does the board have any questions for Mr. Weaver or Mrs. Jones? All right, Mr. Brown, would you care to add any additional information to the discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I would like to note that I misspoke. The minimum lot size for RR zoning is 25,000 square foot.
Okay. Was Mr. Brown with Stroud with us?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to add anything to the?
Yes, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Landon covered a good bit of it in what he said. There's a small portion of that of the eastern cul-de-sac that's going to drain towards a pipe that's on a common lot line between lot 41 and 42. And right before we get to the row of existing trees that are there, we're going to have a swale graded out that continues to go downhill. I'm not sure about the situation the gentleman adjacent to us has on his lot, but we're going to do everything we can to keep our water on our side and off of him through that swale. So I hope that would address his question, and I'm open to any questions from the board.
Okay, I think Mr. Landon has his hand up for a question.
Yes, I'm not exactly sure who is speaking. I'm not exactly sure who this question should be for. It might even have been for myself if I had done my homework. So I, again, ask you to forgive me for being such a newbie. I'm wondering how this proposal, if anybody knows, fits in with the Horizon Plan.
Does any of the planning staff want to speak to that? I believe the Horizon Plan is a City of Greenville plan, correct?
Primarily.
Yes, Mr. Landron, the county has its own comprehensive land use plan, and this particular area is designated for suburban residential or rural residential. So this type of development is well suited within our comprehensive land use plan. The city's Horizon Plan does extend out to this area and pretty much mirrors what the county's proposal is too, as far as land use development. The area just to the other side of Bedard Road is actually within the Village of Simpson's planning jurisdiction, and their land use plan is somewhat similar as a suburban residential area.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes.
One more thing. Does the developer have anything as far as studies on traffic, proposed traffic impacts?
I don't know if Mr. Brown would like to step up and say anything about this, but what Mr. Weaver's already mentioned, this has been reviewed by the Department of Transportation. All the traffic that goes into this neighborhood, the outlet is on to Bedard Road, which is a state maintained road. The average daily traffic count on that road is fairly low at this point in time. We're in the process of updating our comprehensive transportation plan for the county. And this particular road segment doesn't have the traffic count that even warrants further review within that plan. So it's down below 2,000 trips per day on that roadway. So at this point, it's still, I know at certain times of the day, it's fairly busy, especially early mornings and late afternoons. But outside of that, it's a fairly rural roadway. And Richie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I think, Mr. Weaver, did you want to comment on that as well?
I think James characterized it pretty well. I think he covered it down to what it is. It's a rural road with not much traffic at this point. Later on, there may be other things that come along that tip that scale, but I think at this point, it's a pretty low traveled road in relation to requirements.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other questions from the board? If I don't see anybody's hands raised, so if we could have a motion, the recommendation from the planning staff is for conditional approval. Mr. Little, are you making that motion?
I am. I move that we grant conditional approval.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Do I hear a second? I think Mr. Moore is making that second.
Yes, I second.
All right, and if we'll do a roll call vote.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Fred Alston.
Vote for conditional approval, yes.
Mr. Don Brown.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Naomi Buck.
Yes.
Brad Guth.
Yes.
John Landry.
Yes on conditional approval.
Okay. Mr. Little, Steve Little.
Yes.
Tucker Moore.
Yes.
Maria Rogerson.
Yes.
You have unanimous decision in favor of conditional approval, Mr. Chair. And our next item is a rezoning item, and Ben Rogers will be presenting that item.
Okay.
Good evening, Chairman and board members. We do have one rezoning request this evening, and it has been submitted by Larry and Tracy Lewis for their property located on the western side, excuse me for my spreadsheet, the western side of County Home Road, from general commercial to rural residential. Some site information here. This is the site area. As you can see, it's located on the western side of County Home Road, just south of the intersection with Worthington Lane. Some site pictures. This is the subject property looking straight on from County Home Road. This is the view to the south on County Home Road. The view to the north going back towards Greenville. This is the adjacent property right to the north of the property. Is currently being used for farmland. Across the street on County Home Road is a residential duplex. There's another single family home just also across the street on County Home Road. And there are several commercial land uses in the area. Just to the south of this subject property, this is Alex Pine Straw and Mulch. And a little farther south down County Home Road with this intersection with Worthington Road is Charlie's Grill. And just north of the subject property, and this is in Greenville's ETJ, is a commercial daycare. The comprehensive land use plan does designate this area as suburban residential. And the suburban residential designation is intended to include residential land uses, including single family and manufactured home subdivisions and manufactured home parks at 1 to 4 dwelling units per acre, as well as limited multifamily, commercial, office, light industrial, and public institutional uses meeting location criteria. And again, this land designated as suburban residential is distinguished by the greater potential for development and the inclusion of broader range of land uses. The existing land use, you see that the subject property is being used as commercial. There's a daycare center on the site now. You see the majority of the area there in in the county's jurisdiction is either residential or agricultural and undeveloped. The existing zoning for the area, again, the entire area outside of the site is currently zoned RR, rural residential. The rural residential district is primarily intended to accommodate low density, single family residential uses and their associated supporting public and institutional uses in areas that generally do not have access to public or community water or sewer systems. Pitt County planning staff does find that this request is consistent with the Pitt County Comprehensive Land Use Plan because the site is located in a primarily residential area and surrounding properties are zoned rural residential. And additionally, the request meets locational criteria for the suburban residential land use category. Planning staff also finds this request as reasonable and in the public interest because of the residential nature of the area in which it is proposed to be located. And the proposed zoning is primarily intended for residential uses and their associated supporting public and institutional uses in areas that generally do not have access to public or community water or sewer systems and is compatible with surrounding land uses. And planning staff does approve this request by Larry and Tracy Lewis. Comments will now be entertained by the planning board, and the planning board will make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners who are scheduled to have a public hearing on November 16th. And I will turn it back over to you, Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. This is, I think we have an opportunity. Well, first, let's ask if anybody had any questions for Mr. Rogers and his planning staff review and recommendations. Mr. Moore, I see you have your hand up. Do you have a question or?
Oh, no.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? I think we do have the property owner that would like to speak, Mr. Lewis.
So I'm sorry, Chairman Guth.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and maybe Mr. Lewis is getting ready to address this, but is the daycare going to continue to operate? at that location is my big question.
And I'll let Mr. Lewis, if he's on, if he will address that question.
I think he's still muted.
Mr. Lewis, if you could hit *6 so you can unmute yourself, please. Mr. Lewis, if you're there, can you please hit *6 on your phone to unmute yourself?
It's closed currently, so they couldn't open up if it's rezoned.
All right, let's, should we just go ahead and move forward? It seems like we're having a little difficulty here. Mr. Austin, are you comfortable moving forward without having your question answered?
And I can address it briefly. Going to rural residential, if this is approved, the daycare currently is not being operated as a daycare, and it would not be able to reopen as a daycare if this rezoning request goes through by the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you. So do I hear a motion for approval? Mr. Moore?
I move that we approve. Recommend approval.
And I think Mr. Little has raised his hand to second that motion.
That is true. I second.
If we'll do a roll call vote.
Okay, this is to recommend approval for the rezoning that Ben just presented. Fred Alston.
Approve.
Don Brown. Mr. Brown.
Approve.
Naomi Buck.
Approved.
Brad Guth.
Approve.
John Landry.
Approved.
Steve Little.
Approved.
Tucker Moore.
Approved.
Maria Rogerson.
Approved.
That's a unanimous decision, Mr. Chair. And we have a couple of planning matters that Eric Gooby's going to bring you up to date on.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Do just have a couple items. Going to run through a couple things fairly briefly, but there's a lot of information to take in, but we'll try to get through it fairly quickly. The first is NC 43 South Corridor Land Use Plan. This is our monthly update on our progress for being made. It's being made on this plan. I also want to kind of give you a quick update on the background information and just kind of explain sort of how we're coming up with the framework of the plan. And we're hoping to have a final draft of it within the next month or two. So the items that we've completed so far this month is we've begun to develop our draft goals and objectives for the future land use and also develop the future land use map. So that'll be what we use to make recommendations for things like rezonings and development as they occur within the corridor. Some of the next steps that we're looking at, again, to finalize that draft plan for review by our working group. We're looking to hold our next working group meeting sometime in mid-November. Mr. Guth, you're part of that group, as well as Mr. Davenport, who's not on the meeting tonight. Then looking to have a second public input session in late November and December. The first one we held was virtual. So we'll probably be looking at a similar format for that. Excuse me. And then hopefully have the full finalized draft plan before this board in December for your review and recommendation. And we'll be looking to have a public hearing at this board level. And then once we get a recommendation for that, take that to the Board of County Commissioners the first of the year. So what I want to kind of talk about a little bit is again, just the framework of the plan, just to how we're, what sort of information is going into the plan to sort of formulate the goals and objectives and help us craft this plan for this area. So just one of the main components was obviously public input. And I'm not giving a full rundown of all the survey results. We've had 2 surveys currently that we've posted online. Got a lot of input and a lot of responses based off those surveys. But just some of the results here. One is that what do you value most about the area? And then also what is the vision for the area? And these were sort of open-ended questions that allow people to provide their own answers so that we weren't directing them to certain answers. And this created a word map or a word cloud that sort of takes the most prevalent answers to those questions and makes them bigger. So the bigger the terms you see, the more prevalent, the more important it was to the people. So you see in terms of what they value most about the area, they're looking more at the rural character, natural resources, affordability and open space, those sorts of things. What their vision for the area is, one of the ones that really stands out is to stay rural, but also to allow more businesses in certain areas. And then also to manage the traffic and control the growth in the area. We also had another part of the survey that sort of gauged what their goals are. One of the things with this corridor is that we recognize, and I'll kind of explain a little bit more here in a second, that there's really 2 distinct halves to this corridor. The northern part, which is from Hollywood's Crossroads back up to Bells Fork and Fire Tower Road, and then the southern portion, which goes from Hollywood's Crossroads back down south towards Chicad. And we saw some of the survey results we saw really sort of highlighted the differences in those 2 areas. These particular questions asked what people's goals and preferences were for these parts of the corridors. And the area that the line that you see in green, that's for the northern part, and the blue is for the southern. And the text is probably kind of small for your screens, but what we see is that the areas where it's real heavy on the green for that northern portion, that's for things like maintaining uncongested roadways, minimizing traffic congestion, creating commercial nodes at key intersections, and to expand walkability, to expand opportunities for other non-residential types of uses. And then the areas that are real heavy in the blue, that southern portion, that's where we see a lot of preserving that rural character and the agriculture in that area. So along with that, we also started looking at some of our existing conditions and analyzing those. Things like, what are the characters of this corridor? And as you work your way from the south back up, there are really 3 distinct characters that we see. The first, as you get back down towards Chicad, as you're heading back up into Greenville, is the rural agricultural character. This is a very rural country highway road. There's no sidewalks, there's no bikes or no bike lanes. You see roads with ditches. There's very few driveway cuts. So it's a very rural, open feel, and very agricultural. As you get more in towards Hollywood's Crossroads and moving north, we have what we call the exurban area. And it's a little more urbanized. There's more driveway cuts. There's more homes in the area. The traffic is typically a little bit faster, but it's not as congested as it was when you get into the city. And then as you get back up towards Bells Fork, it's more of a suburban character. Again, we don't have a lot of sidewalks in the area. There's not really any bike facilities, but you're seeing more commercial land uses, more driveways, and again, faster traffic and more congestion as you get into those higher populated areas and more dense areas. Another thing we're looking at is existing land uses. If you've been down the corridor, you know that there's
it's mostly residential until you get to about Hollywood's Crossroads. There's some scattered commercial land uses, some institutional uses like churches. Then you have the schools in the areas with Conley and Hope Middle School on Mills Road. And then as you move further south, those commercial land uses get a little bit more sporadic. And then you still have more residential land uses along the highway. A lot of these factors that we look at, they go into what's called an urban development suitability analysis. And this helps to create sort of a heat map that shows where the areas are that are most suitable for some type of urban or even suburban development. And there's a number of factors, things like the size of the parcels, there's environmental constraints, things like wetlands or floodplain areas, if sewer is available to certain parcels, their proximity to other existing commercial uses, where other residential uses are concentrated at, and then also the traffic volumes in schools and parks. So when you plug this into this program, and it runs this algorithm that takes all these things into consideration, it generates this heat map. And sort of what we see is that the areas, particularly around Chicod, around Hollywood's Crossroads, and then up towards Fire Tower Road and Bells Fork area, those are the areas that are really more suitable for that higher, denser development. And a lot of that's driven by the availability of sewer or the possibility of having sewer through those areas. So there's other land use considerations. And what this means is that when we start drafting our goals and objectives for this plan and start determining what we want to see or how we want this corridor developed, these are the considerations that we're looking at. So in terms of the study area, it's probably a little hard to see, but the red outline is our study area. First, you have the suburban commercial future at Fire Tower Road and how that's going to continue to develop, any kind of improvements and growth. Again, this plan is not just a county plan. We're partnering with the city. And so the city's having some input on this in terms of how they want that area to develop. Another consideration is the NC 43 widening project. That's probably the main impetus for the development of this plan. It's going from a 2-lane facility with a median in the middle or a center turn lane to a 4-lane divided facility with a median in the middle. That widening project is also going to create 2 roundabouts at Signature Drive and Hollywood's Crossroads. Also, as we saw from a lot of our public comments and our survey results, people were really interested in having a commercial activity node developed at Hollywood's Crossroads, and there's already some existing commercial zoning there, as well as some existing commercial land uses. And then also another consideration is the areas that the city recently annexed last year on Mills Road, and how those residential areas are continuing to expand eastward. And the reason for that is obviously the sewer service. There's a sewer shed in that area from GUC. It's possible that other properties could request annexation to tie into that sewer, and we want to make sure that our plan accounts for that. And then also, as I mentioned, as you get south of Hollywood's Crossroads, there was a real interest in maintaining the rural character of the southern portion of the corridor. So we want our goals to help preserve that character. And then also allowing some limited development around Chicod. As you saw on that heat map, that area is designated or is shown as being somewhat suitable for more development. Again, there's already some commercial zoning out there. We've had some development. There's a new Dollar General. There's the school there. We have a subdivision that was recently considered by this board that's going in that area. So we recognize there's going to be some more development around the Chicod area. So again, just as a reminder, our next steps, we're going to finalize this land use plan, take it to our working group, hopefully in mid-November, working on holding a second public input session. And then by the end of the year, hopefully bringing it to this board for your review and recommendation. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have about this.
Thank you, Mr. Gooby. Excellent presentation. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Gooby? All right, we'll move forward to the next item on the agenda then. I think that's you as well.
Yes, sir. So the next major item, one of our major projects we're also working on is implementing the new Chapter 160D. with the general statutes. And what this is, in last year, the General Assembly adopted a session law 2019-111, and that includes a new chapter for the general statutes that governs the state's planning and development regulations. And what it does, it's a complete and total overhaul, reorganization, modernization of the statutes. It takes the previous enabling statutes, which previously counties and cities operated under separate statutes and had similar but sometimes different rules for governing planning and development. So it took all those statutes and combined them into one big chapter, which is 160D. And so now counties and cities operate under the same rules and have all the same requirements that are put on us by the state. And so it also takes it and reorganizes it into a sort of a more logical and cohesive order. In previous statutes, there were things that might be addressed in one statute, might be placed in another part, but they all govern the same thing. So they took them and they put all things that are quasi-judicial in one section, all things that are subdivision in one section. So it's more logical, it's easier to find things, and it just makes a little more sense. So the chapter was originally intended to become effective in January 1st of next year. Because of COVID, that sort of pushed everything back. They adopted a session law this year that made it effective immediately. And so, but what they did is they're allowing local governments until July 1st to actually implement the law. So until July 1st, we're still essentially operating under the old laws, even though the new law is effective today. But we will have until July 1st to get our ordinances amended and to get into compliance. And so with that, it's going to require a significant number of amendments to all of our ordinances, all of our development related ordinances, more so zoning than any of the other ones. But what I'm going to do is just kind of go through a few of the changes. You have in your packet a checklist that was provided by the School of Government. And if you look through it, you probably see a lot of things that go, and you're going, well, this looks like something we're doing already. And chances are we probably are. But the new law basically just makes it more explicit that you have to do certain things. So one of the things that's a big one and that takes a lot of time to update is the terminology and the citations. We have to make sure that all of our terminology aligns with what's in the statutes and make sure that all of our references to the statutes refer to 160D and not 153A. One of the main ones for this is special use permits. As you probably know, currently our county zoning ordinance has conditional use permits and special use permits. The statutes do away with conditional use permits and put them all under special use. So we have to go through and take all of our conditional uses, make them special uses, figure out how we're going to continue to split certain ones to the Board of County Commissioners, certain ones to the Board of Adjustment. Another one is also the terminology for hearings. And we always have called them public hearings in the past. The new legislation says public hearings for things like rezonings are to be determined or be referred to as a legislative hearing as opposed to a public hearing. Same thing with quasi-judicial. Instead of a public hearing, it's not really a public hearing at a quasi-judicial level, it's an evidentiary hearing. And so the statutes are making that distinction now. Some other things with boards, we have to adopt broadened conflict of interest standards. Oaths of office are required for all boards now. Again, as you know tonight, we already do that for this board. And then planning boards may also coordinate citizen engagement and also may serve as a preliminary forum for review and comment on quasi-judicial decisions. However, that forum and any comments or recommendations cannot be used as the basis for the quasi-judicial decision, if that makes sense to y'all. There's updated procedures for enforcement. Again, under zoning ordinances, we have to eliminate conditional use permits and change those to special use permits. The ordinance or the statutes also now allow minor administrative modifications for development approvals, including conditional zoning and special use permits. So our ordinance already has some provisions, but it actually specifies that we can do more, that we have that ability to make those modifications at a staff level administratively rather than going back before the board. The one thing is that it may not involve any change in use or density.
If that is involved, then it has to go back before the board and has to be approved under the same process that it was originally approved under. Other development ordinances may incorporate by reference maps that are officially adopted by the state or federal agencies, such as firm or floodplain maps. Performance guarantees have to conform to the state statutes. One thing is you cannot exclude manufactured homes based on age, and that comes out of existing case law, but it's actually codified now in the statutes. And what that means is if you have an ordinance that says a manufactured home can't be older than 10 years, that's no longer allowed. You have to base it off some rule or some other condition. And ours is currently that it can't be older than 1976, which is when the HUD requirements came in for manufactured homes. One other requirement is that comprehensive plans are now required. The state never mandated that a local government had to have a comprehensive plan or land use plan. Now, in order to have zoning, you must have a comprehensive plan or a land use plan, and it also must be reasonably maintained. There's a lot of changes to legislative decisions, mainly in terms of how notice is provided. It revises the plan consistency language for zoning amendments. So when you all are acting on a rezoning, it's more standardized language for that. Zoning map amendments and comprehensive land use plan amendments may also be considered concurrently. There's always been a question about that, whether we could do that, and the state law now says it can. Problem is you cannot require a separate application or a separate fee, so they have to be combined under one. It prohibits third-party down zonings without the consent of the landowner. And also, if you have any conditions for conditional zoning, you have to have written consent from the applicant or landowner before you can enforce those conditions. Quasi-judicial decisions, again, we have to use the terminology evidentiary hearings rather than public hearings. It states now that you have to follow quasi-judicial procedures. Parties with standing must be allowed to participate fully in the hearings. And there's more requirements for evidentiary hearings that you can continue those without any kind of additional public notice, as long as you announce the date and time and place at the original hearing. And again, also with special permits, like with conditional zoning, you have to have written consent from the applicant to enforce any conditions. There's also some changes to development approvals. All approvals must be in writing. Applications have to be made by a person that has a property interest or contract to purchase on the property. And also establishes default expirations of 12 months on permits and approvals if work is not substantially commenced. There's also a few changes to vested rights. Now specifies that if you have a site-specific vesting plan, that's what they're calling it now. It used to be a site-specific development plan. If you have a vesting plan, it's valid for a minimum of 2 years. And can be extended up to 5 years depending on certain conditions. And also if you have what's called a multi-phase development, it's where they have a minimum of 25 acres that's subject to a master development plan that sort of describes when all the phases are going to be brought online. Those are vested up to 7 years. And then you also have what they're calling permit choice. And permit choice allows if a development regulation changes after somebody submitted an application for a development approval, the applicant has the opportunity to choose which rule will apply to their development. So for instance, if they submit a subdivision plan and have 25,000 square foot lots, and our rule changes to require 35,000 square foot lots, they can choose to use the old rule as opposed to the new rule. And one of the requirements on that, though, is that if the applicant is the one who delays it, if they delay it more than 6 months, then we can enforce the new rules. And we also cannot make them wait for final action on the new rules before we proceed with their approval. So just as a project schedule, through the end of the year, we're going to be continuing to draft these amendments. Again, it's a lot of work, a lot of just minutia to go through. And hopefully by the first of the year, begin presenting those amendments to this board. And again, following
schedule hearings for this board, as well as the Board of County Commissioners through the spring to meet that July 1st effective date. So, Mr. Chair, that's all I have on that. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer anything.
Thank you, Mr. Gooby. Does anyone have any questions? Looks like we're going to have a little bit of work cut out for us in the near future.
Yes, sir.
I don't see any hands or any comments to be made, so we're going to move on to the informational items.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And you're correct, Mr. Chair. There will be a lot more information coming to you. Both Eric and Ben have spent a lot of time working on these regs already, plus your NC 43 South Land Use Plan will be coming before you before too long too. So some of our major work program items will be coming back here in the near future. So real quickly, informational items for you that have just joined us, such as Mr. Landron. You may not be aware, but the county, Pitt County, was recognized as an All-America County. We were one of 10 communities nationwide that was recognized by the National Civic League as an All-America community. We are the only county in the United States that was recognized as such this year. So with that, along with our public information office, you may have seen some billboards around town, but also as you're entering into the county, we've gotten permission from DOT to actually install All-America County signs. So those are being installed as we speak, and hopefully will be at all 22 main roads into the community. Those are NC and US routes, so they should be in. If you're going out of the county, be sure to look at it when you come back in. Other items, many of you are aware, you've seen our work program. Our office is also involved with not only community development activities, but also homeless prevention activities. And there were 2 recent budget amendments that allow funding from federal agencies to come into our budget to assist with homeless prevention activities. And we're, as you know, with the pandemic, there's been an awful lot of folks that have been put out of work, that are struggling in keeping their housing, and we're trying to assist in some of those situations. Also, many of you are familiar with the Candlewick Sewer Project that we wrapped up earlier this year for phase 1. We're now looking at phase 2. We're working with the consulting firm to go door to door to do some surveying to see exactly where our best hope is to extending the sewer in the near future. So more than likely we'll have an application put together for consideration by the state sometime next month. With that too, Mr. Chairman, there are a couple of items or a couple of reports in, monthly items from our office. A lot of information about some of the activities locally that have been going on. Eric's alluded to conditional use permits. As you know, our Board of County Commissioners actually serve as the approval board for conditional uses. We had 3 cases that were heard last month. It did require face-to-face meetings, so those have been held over for a while. We're glad that those 3 were dealt with. One was a solar farm, another was a sand mine, and then the third was an in-home daycare. So those are type of uses that require additional action through a quasi-judicial procedure by our Board of Commissioners. And with that, there's some other correspondence in there, but Mr. Chair, that's all we have for tonight, unless there are any questions about any of the information that's been covered so far.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Does there anybody have a question for Mr. Rhodes or anybody else on the planning team? Doesn't look like we have any questions, but thank you very much for all this work. And I look forward to seeing everybody next month. If I can hear a motion to adjourn. Oh, we have Mr. Steve Little.
Yes, I'll make a motion to adjourn, but in the meantime, I'd like to just make sure we encourage everyone to vote within these next next few days, okay?
Absolutely. Motion, do I hear a second? Second from Mr. Brown. And can I get a voice acclamation that we adjourn?
Adjourn.
Right. Thank you very much. We'll see everybody next month.
Good evening.